How do this? 2i times 3 plus 4i. I assume those are complex numbers. Math, much hard. Math is much hard.
Math is much hard. It is very difficult, especially once you introduce imaginary numbers. So if you're not here yet in your math education, please don't freak out, but there are such thing as imaginary numbers. Not only do you have to deal with the real numbers, but you got the imaginary ones as well. Thankfully, imaginary numbers are not all that difficult to deal with. They work very much so like real numbers, except they're imaginary. The letter that we use to represent imaginary numbers is I. I, all that is equal to the square root of -1. And basically, I, or the imaginary number I, helps us deal with quantities when we work some difficult math and we end up getting a negative square root, which some of you know is not allowed in real numbers, at least. The other thing that we want to remember is that I squared, so if we square the square root of -1, we end up with just -1. And these are kind of the big rules that I tell my students they need to remember when they work with imaginary numbers. If you're doing something like simplifying an expression, like as this student wanted, then I works just like X does, except you need to simplify if you have a power that's above just 1. So in this expression, what we're doing is multiplying, and I'm going to bring out that area model that I brought up earlier, and we're going to use that as a tool to help us multiply these. So what I do is I'm going to make 2 minus I my width, and I'm going to make 3 plus 4i my length. And if I multiply together my length and my width, I should get area. And so then therefore area is my answer. So I start in the top left box. The top left box says 2 times 3, so that gives me 6. The top right box is -I times 3. And like I mentioned, it works just like X. It has the same kind of rules as X does. So I end up with -3i. Then I'm going to do the top, or the bottom left box, which is 2 times 4i. That'll give me 8i. And then the bottom right, I've got -I times 4i, which will give me -4i squared, just as if it were x. At this point, then we need to combine all of our like terms. So we have 6 plus -3i, or -3i. Then I have plus 8i. And then I have -4i squared. Now, the -3i and the 8i, those are like terms because they have the same ending. So we're going to put those together to give us 5i, +8 and -3. And then the last thing that we need to pay attention to is the fact that this I squared, oh, there it is, it equals -1. And so the way that we would simplify -4i squared is -4 times -1. And then I'm just going to be simplifying from here. So I have -4 times -1, that gives me +4. And then we see some like terms again, the 6 and the 4. So lastly, we can put those two together. And this is as simple as I can get. Usually in your answer when you're working with imaginary numbers, you'll have a real number and an imaginary number. So the real number is the 10, and then the 5i is the imaginary number. And your final answer will be in that form. We can't put imaginary numbers and real numbers together. So hopefully that helps a little bit, at least with working with imaginary numbers. There's a lot more to be said about them, but this is how we work with them and how you would multiply together two complex numbers.